Psychologists discovered something that even surprised them. When people looked at the face of someone who had betrayed them, inside a brain scanner, the exact same region activated as it does during physical pain. Which means the pain you felt when your best friend betrayed you, when someone you trusted completely chose to lie to your face, that was not emotional. That was real. Your brain registered it the same way it would register a broken bone. But here is what nobody is talking about. We spend years studying the person who was hurt, the trauma, the trust issues, the way they flinch now in relationships they didn't flinch in before. But today, I want to go somewhere uncomfortable. I want to go inside the mind of the person who does the betraying, and I want to show you a picture that is far more complicated and far more human than the one you've been carrying. Stay with me, because by the end of this, something might shift for you, something that has been stuck for a very long time. Let's start with the biology, because this matters. The region that activates when you feel physical pain, it's called the anterior cingulate cortex. And in 2003, a landmark study at UCLA showed that this exact same region lights up during social rejection and betrayal. Not a nearby region, not a similar region, the same region. Now, why would evolution wire us this way? Why would losing a friendship hurt in the same place as losing a finger? Because for most of human history, being cast out of the group meant death. Social connection was not a luxury, it was survival. The brain learned over hundreds of thousands of years to treat the loss of a trusted relationship with the same urgency as a physical threat to your life. So when someone close betrays you, your brain is not being dramatic. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. It is sounding the alarm. Something essential has been damaged. And this is why you couldn't sleep, why you replayed the moment over and over, why you lost your appetite, why you couldn't concentrate when your body felt heavy for weeks in a way you struggled to explain to anyone who hadn't been through it. You were not weak, you were wounded. But now, I want to ask a different question entirely, because we have studied the wound for a long time. What we haven't studied is the person holding the knife. Here's the thing that most people get wrong about betrayal. We imagine it as a single moment, a single decision. We picture someone sitting across from us, looking at us, and in one clear, deliberate moment, choosing to hurt us. But that is almost never what actually happens. Research in moral psychology, particularly the work of Albert Bandura on moral disengagement, shows that most betrayals are not events, they are processes. They begin with something very small. A thought, this one time won't matter. A rationalization, I deserve this. A quiet reassurance, they'll never find out. And here's the thing about rationalizations. Every single one you make lowers the threshold for the next one. Your brain adapts. Your conscience, which is loud at first, grows quieter. Not because the person has become evil, but because the brain is extraordinarily good at protecting us from the discomfort of our own choices. Psychologists call this the boiling frog effect of moral drift. You don't leap into betrayal, you wade in slowly, 1 inch at a time, until one day you look up and you don't quite recognize where you are or how you got there. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it doesn't make what happened to you okay, but it does make it human. And understanding the humanity in it is the only way to stop carrying it like something supernatural. Now, here is where it gets really complicated, and I need you to stay with me here. Most people who betray someone do not see themselves as the betrayer. They have their own story, and in their story, they are not the villain. They are someone who was already suffering, already drowning, already carrying something they didn't know how to put down. Research on moral justification, particularly from Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson, shows that the human mind has an almost unlimited capacity to reframe its own actions in a flattering light, not out of malice, out of psychological survival. We cannot live with the idea that we are bad people, so we construct stories that make our choices feel inevitable, justified, even necessary. I wouldn't have done it if they had just listened to me. I felt alone in that relationship long before I ever acted. I tried to tell them something was wrong. They didn't want to hear it. Now, and this is important, those stories are not automatically false. Sometimes they contain real pain, real loneliness, real desperation. The problem is not that the story exists. The problem is that the story was used to justify crossing a line that should not have been crossed, to bypass a conversation that should have been had, to take something that was never theirs to take. But here is the psychological reality. People do not become betrayers in a moment. They drift there gradually, when they believe there is no other road, when they have stopped believing that honesty is safe, when they have decided, consciously or not, that the relationship cannot hold what they are actually feeling. That is not an excuse, but it is an explanation, and those two things are not the same. Let's come back to you, the person on the other side of this, because here is something that has never quite been explained properly. After betrayal, the person who was hurt is left with a cognitive impossibility. One single human being who was simultaneously their source of safety and the source of their pain. The same face, the same voice, the same person who once made them feel most seen in the world is now the person who shattered something inside them. And the brain cannot hold both of those truths at once, so it loops. You find yourself replaying conversations, looking for the signs you missed, running through the timeline, looking for the moment it all turned, and you can't find it because, as we now know, it didn't turn in a moment. It drifted, gradually, beneath the surface, in a direction you couldn't see. And that is one of the cruelest parts of betrayal that nobody talks about. It's not just that someone hurt you, it's that the hurt is illegible. You can't point to the day, you can't find the fault line. And so the brain keeps searching, because that's what brains do. They look for patterns, for meaning, for a way to make the chaos into something ordered, and it never quite does. In trauma psychology, this is called the shattered assumptions effect, a term developed by psychologist Ronnie Janoff-Bullman. She found that the most destabilizing part of a major betrayal is not the event itself, it is the destruction of the three core beliefs most of us carry unconsciously. 1. The world is basically safe. 2. Life is basically meaningful. 3. I have worth. When someone close betrays you, all three of those assumptions crack at once, and the rebuilding of them is not a weekend project. It takes time, it takes intention, and it takes understanding that what broke was not just the relationship, it was a worldview, and you are allowed to grieve that. I want to spend some time here because this might be the most misunderstood part of everything we're talking about today. Forgiveness has been sold to betrayed people as a kind of moral obligation. You need to forgive for yourself, not for them. And while there is truth buried in that, the way it's delivered often lands like a second wound, like the person who was hurt is being asked to do more emotional labor, to be bigger, to rise above, while the person who caused the harm gets to move on. So I want to offer a different frame. Forgiveness is not a single event. It is not a decision you make on a Tuesday afternoon that resolves everything by Wednesday. Research from the field of positive psychology, particularly Robert Enright's forgiveness model, shows that forgiveness is a process that unfolds in stages, often over years, and it does not require reconciliation, contact, or even the other person's acknowledgement. What forgiveness actually is, psychologically, is the gradual release of the physiological charge attached to the memory. It doesn't mean the memory goes away. It doesn't mean what happened was acceptable. It means that when that memory surfaces, it no longer hijacks your nervous system the way it once did. The grip loosens. And here is something that might feel counterintuitive. Understanding the psychology of the person who betrayed you, not excusing them, not justifying them, but understanding them, is one of the most powerful tools for accelerating that process. Because when we understand something, the brain can finally categorize it. It can file it. It stops treating the memory as an open wound that needs constant monitoring and starts treating it as something that happened, something real, something painful, but something that is over. That shift from open wound to closed chapter is what people often mistake for forgiveness. It's not quite that. It's something more practical. It's the nervous system deciding it no longer needs to be on guard. I want to talk about something that rarely gets said out loud. Most people, if they are truly honest with themselves, have been on both sides of this. Maybe not in the same dramatic way, maybe it wasn't a grand betrayal, maybe it was smaller. A friendship you let drift because keeping it was inconvenient. A truth you held back because saying it out loud felt like too much risk. A moment where you chose your own comfort over someone else's need to know the truth and told yourself a story about why that was okay. We do not like to hold both of those identities at once, the wounded and the one who wounded, but most of us, if we're honest, carry both. And the psychological weight of having betrayed someone is its own specific kind of suffering. Research on guilt, healthy guilt, not the corrosive kind, shows that the genuine recognition of harm caused activates the same social pain network. The brain registers moral failure as a form of disconnection, which is exactly what it is. The person who betrayed someone and genuinely understood what they did lives with a particular kind of haunting, the knowledge that they were the reason someone's worldview cracked, that they were the one who made someone flinch in relationships they didn't flinch in before. That is not nothing. That deserves to be named.
Here's what the part I want to be very careful about, because it is easy to misread. I am not saying that betrayal is justified by difficult circumstances. I am not saying that pain excuses harm. I am not saying the person who was hurt should simply understand and move on. What I am saying is something more specific. Human behavior does not emerge from a vacuum. Every choice a person makes, including the choice to betray someone, is the product of 1,000 smaller choices, wounds, fears, and beliefs that preceded it. Some of those were that person's responsibility to examine and address. Some of them were handed to them before they were old enough to choose. In developmental psychology, there is a concept called the working model of relationships, the internal blueprint for how relationships work, formed in early childhood, that shapes how we behave in every close relationship we ever have. People who grew up in environments where honesty felt dangerous tend to become adults who cannot be honest when a relationship is under pressure. Not because they are bad people, but because their nervous system learned very early that honesty leads to rejection, punishment, or abandonment. That doesn't mean the person they hurt is responsible for their unhealed wounds. It doesn't mean the betrayal didn't happen, or that the damage wasn't real. But it does mean that when you ask the question, "How could they do this to me?" the honest answer is often something like, because they had never learned how to do anything else when they felt this afraid. And that answer, genuinely received, often does something remarkable. It shifts the question from "what is wrong with me that this happened?" to "what happened to them that they got here?" That shift is not just philosophically interesting, it is neurologically powerful. It removes you from the center of their story. It reminds you in a cellular, felt way that this was never entirely about you, that you were not chosen as a target because of some fundamental flaw in who you are. You were, in many ways, simply the closest person when something they had been carrying finally broke.
That doesn't make it fair, but it might make it something you can finally set down. I want to be honest about this section because healing gets talked about in ways that are often frustratingly vague. Give it time. Be kind to yourself. Focus on your growth. All true, all incomplete. Here's what the research actually says about recovering from relational betrayal. First, narrative coherence. Studies by James Pennybacker at the University of Texas show that people who write about a traumatic experience over several days, structured, reflective writing, not just venting, demonstrate measurable improvements in immune function, emotional regulation, and long-term mental health outcomes. The act of constructing a coherent narrative around what happened, finding the through line, understanding the arc, is not just therapeutic, it is biological. The brain processes trauma better when it can be turned into a story with a beginning, middle, and some form of meaning. Second, social reconnection. After betrayal, the brain's threat detection system becomes hyperactivated in the context of close relationships. You become vigilant in a way that is exhausting. Trust feels dangerous. Vulnerability feels like a setup. And the only way to gradually recalibrate that system is careful, intentional re-exposure to safe connection. Not recklessly, not immediately, but deliberately. Finding people who can hold what you offer with care, and allowing yourself to offer it, a little at a time. Third, and this is the one nobody talks about, somatic processing. The memory of betrayal does not only live in the mind, it lives in the body. Research in trauma studies, particularly the work of Bessel van der Kolk, shows that traumatic experiences become encoded in the nervous system and are retrieved not just as thoughts, but as physical sensations. The tightening in your chest when you think about it, the way your stomach drops when you hear their name. These are not metaphors, these are physiological events. And they require physiological responses, movement, breath, body-based practices that signal safety to a nervous system that is still, in some part of itself, waiting for the threat to return. Healing is not just thinking your way through, it is feeling your way through. Slowly, with patience, with an understanding that the body has its own timeline, and that timeline deserves respect. I think we treat betrayal far too simply. We divide the world into villains and victims. We assign each person a role and we expect them to stay in it. The one who was hurt is allowed to be complex, to have good days and bad days, to be angry and then sad, to forgive and then not quite. But the one who caused the hurt is supposed to remain fixed, a symbol of a choice, a lesson in who not to trust. But psychology tells us consistently across decades of research that human beings are primarily creatures of context. We are shaped by what happened to us before we had the language to describe it. We are influenced by systems, environments, and relationships that formed us long before the choices we get judged for. That is not a defense of harmful behavior. It is a statement about the complexity of being human. And I think if we are genuinely interested in becoming people who do not repeat cycles of harm, either towards others or towards ourselves, we have to be willing to hold that complexity, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. The person who betrayed you, if their life had gone differently 10 years earlier, if their wounds had been treated rather than passed on, if they had felt safe enough in the relationship to say the true thing instead of the convenient thing, that choice may never have existed. That is not a reason to trust them again. It is not a reason to let them back in. But it is a reason to release them, not for their sake, for yours. Because carrying the full weight of someone else's unhealed psychology is a very heavy thing to do with one life. Understanding that they were broken in a specific way that produced a specific harm, that is not excusing them. That is freeing yourself from the illusion that you were ever powerful enough to have prevented it. That if you had just been better, smarter, more lovable, more careful, it wouldn't have happened.
It would have happened anyway, because it was never really about you. If you are the person who was betrayed, I want to ask you one question, not to minimize what happened, but to move you toward something. Can you try not to forgive, not to excuse, not to reconcile, but just to understand the person who hurt you, not as a favor to them, as an act of reclamation for yourself? To understand that they were not a monster sent specifically to destroy you. They were a person wounded in specific ways who lacked the specific skills required to do anything else than what they did. That understanding, genuinely arrived at, is often what finally breaks the invisible chain that still keeps you tethered to that moment, the one that makes you think about them in quiet rooms, the one that makes their name still carry weight it shouldn't. Understanding is the key that unlocks that chain, not forgiveness, not forgetting, just understanding. And if you are the person who did the betraying, if you are carrying something that has been heavy for a long time, something you've never quite looked at directly, I want to ask you something honest. What did you actually need in that moment? Not what you told yourself you needed, not the rationalization you constructed afterward. What was the real thing underneath? The fear, the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible or trapped or unseen. What were you actually trying to reach for that you went looking for in completely the wrong place? That answer, genuinely found, not performed, is your real work. Not the apology, not the explanation you owe someone, the honest confrontation with the unmet need that drove the choice. Because until that is named and addressed, the behavior will find another form, in another relationship, in another version of the same mistake. This is the psychology. This is the work. I want to leave you with this. Have you been on both sides of this? The person who was betrayed and the one who did the betraying? Both carry very different weights. The weight of being the wound and the weight of being the one who caused it. Tell me in the comments which one was harder to live with. And if this video reached something in you that you didn't expect it to, share it with someone who might need it. Not someone you're trying to send a message to, someone who is quietly carrying this, someone who might finally be ready to set it down. I'll see you in the next one.